Okay, it's about 10:31, so I think we're going to get started. We may have some people joining as we go, and we welcome everybody. First and foremost, thank you so much for joining us this morning. As I said a few minutes ago, my name is Leslie Wyatt. I'm Director of Regulatory Compliance here at SoftPro. I also have David Proctor, who is the Technical Sales Manager at SoftPro, who's going to help me out and kind of serves as our subject matter expert on all things RON and technical integrations through SoftPro 360. So he's going to go ahead and have a couple things to talk about throughout here as well. So welcome, David, and thank you so much for doing this for us. A little backstory to what we're doing here is we realize we're kind of in a crazy time with COVID-19 and all the stay-at-home orders. And for many of you, I know, we couldn't have our SoftPro user group, and we did a remote one, which got us thinking, boy, that was really nice to stay connected with our customers. We sure would like to do that more often. So we came up with a weekly webinar free to our customers, and we thought we would do different topics each week. We are also open. If you have any ideas or some things you really want to learn about, feel free to email us. You can email myself, you can email your sales rep, whomever, and we'll take a look at it and see if we have a need for it, and a lot of people want it. We also wanted to keep it really lighthearted. Today is kind of more of a serious topic, but we felt it was a necessary one with everything's going on and all the stuff that you guys are going through and changes with closings. We wanted to really get information out there, but quite honestly, some weeks it might be, something really kind of lighthearted and easy of, work from home tips, how to stay sane, how to cook, how to keep in touch with friends and family in this time where you're at home. So we're going to change it up. Hopefully you like it. It's very, very casual. I'll be hosting it each week. I likely have a co-host like today. I have David most weeks. And probably my most favorite part about this is, if any of you all out there know me personally, you know that I absolutely love to cook and entertain. So I decided that throughout this quarantine, I would share a lot of recipes via social media, and it's seemed to be well received thus far. So we're going to end each episode of Save to a Seat with a recipe and a drink recipe, which you can either use or not use. It's completely up to you. And all the drinks will be able to be made with or without alcohol. So depending on how your quarantine's going, you can decide how you want to do that. So with that said, we're going to go ahead and start with episode 1. Again, thank you so much. We're going to go through this. One thing I will point out, if you do have any questions, feel free to type them up in the chat box there, and myself or David will try and get to them. If for whatever reason we don't get to them, we will email you directly afterwards with the answer or how to find the answer if we happen to run out of time before that. Online Notary, otherwise known as RON. We've been talking about it for years, but it has a whole new meaning, and we're going to talk about that. David's actually going to show you and talk you through one of our integrations as well, which I think will be very helpful for people to see. Remote ink signing notarization, yes, that is a thing. I know it's new to many of you. We're going to talk about it. It's otherwise known as RIN, not to be confused with RON, but we're going to talk about that. E-recording, e-signing, e-closings, all the hot topics in our world right now. All right, so before we go into RON, I do think it's important that everybody understands the different types of closings. We throw these terms around like everybody knows what we're talking about. I am guilty of it in my presentations. I do it all the time. So I want to go ahead and just kind of real quickly do a high level of the different types of closings. So as we're going through it, you have a better understanding. And also when your transactional partners are asking for different types of closing, you'll have a better understanding as well. So we can kind of break it down into 4 categories, if you will. The first one is super easy. We've got our traditional wet signing, which means in person, 100% paper documents, wet signatures. It can be in the office, it could be face-to-face with a mobile notary. It could even be a mail away, but of course they've had that notarized face-to-face. It's our traditional way of closing. Those are few and far between nowadays with everything that's going on. There is a big push, obviously, for no face-to-face contact. So we have a hybrid closing. This is pretty popular. It was popular before this, but essentially it is in person. Some paper documents, usually like the deed and note, mortgage and whatnot. Some digital documents with e-signatures, meaning the lender may have sent the borrower or the consumer as many documents that they could sign with an e-signature ahead of time, so that it limits the time that they are at closing And obviously the title companies and settlement agents and attorneys are taking necessary measures to be safe, but there is still some paper documents to be signed in person. And again, it can be done in the office or it can be done with a mobile notary, just like we do now. Those are probably the two most common that we've dealt with previously. Moving forward, and in our current world, we probably have a lot more of these. And you'll notice they say e-closing, 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 but there's different types of e-closings. And I think that's where a lot of people get confused. So we talked about the hybrid closing, which has some e-signatures, and then we can go ahead and talk about e-closing in-person digital. What that means is it's 100% digital documents with signatures. However, it is still in person and face-to-face. And what it means by that is you're sitting at the table and you're signing an iPad, or you're signing via computer or a smart pen, but you are not signing any actual paper documents. And then the end all to be all is our online notary or webcam or remote online notary or RON. Not in person at all. The notary public appears before the signer via a webcam, and we're going to talk about that. And it's 100% digital documents with e-signatures. That is the big push right now with social distancing and stay at home. There are some obstacles to that, even if states or municipalities have, passed emergency orders or have passed legislation saying it's okay. We're going to talk about how it's still kind of an issue in many areas and what we can do about it. Okay, so we're going to dive right into remote online notary. What exactly is remote online notary? I know I just gave an overview, but essentially when you think about RON, it is 100% electronic or digital. And what that means is I can sign from anywhere. I don't have to be in the same physical location as the notary. So this has been an issue, and various states have been passing legislation leading up to this COVID pandemic. So there were some states on board. Some were actually using it. Virginia, I believe Michigan, Colorado. There was a bunch of states that were actually already using it. There was a lot of states that had passed legislation, but hadn't actually had the Secretary of State or the Attorney Generals in that state put the rules and regulations behind it. So it was passed, but not implemented. And what we have now is we're seeing an increase in adoption. And why we're seeing this increase in adoption is because of social distancing, shelter in place effect, what we call it, or COVID-19, right? So they're telling you to stay home, but people still need to, close on their homes. You are all considered essential employees. You guys are kind of on the front lines. You're dealing with people day in, day out. And so they were trying to find ways to keep that going. And ways to keep that going is RON. So there's two kind of ways to look at it is other than the ones that were already in place. One, you have emergency legislation. You have it on the federal level, which we will get into, and then we have it on the state level. The state level is probably more pertinent at this day and time, and I'll explain why. The federal push came before all the states started passing emergency legislation. So what the Federal Secure Notarization Act of 2020 is, back in mid-March, you had a bipartisan push. Bipartisan means we had both a sponsor from the Democratic side and a sponsor from the Republican side. And generally, when you get a bi-party push on a bill or legislation, it has a much greater chance of passing, obviously, right? It has a much greater chance of passing because you have both parties represented, and these things kind of usually get passed a lot quicker than not. So this was a bipartisan push. They call it S3533. S stands for Senate, in case anyone's wondering. And they named it the Securing and Enabling Commerce Using Remote and Electronic Notarization Act of 2020. That is way too long to say. So we had yet another acronym, because Lord knows we love our acronyms in this business. So we call it SECURE. You can call it the Secure Notarization Act of 2020, but it's SECURE. So what it does is, it was a bill that was put out, it's important to look at the date, March 18th. It was put out in March 18th, and it was expected to go through very, very quickly, again, because it's bipartisan, and also secondly, because it's needed. It was needed, and it essentially said, hey, once this passes, the immediate use of remote online notarization, or RON, is allowed nationwide, meaning the minute it passes, every state in the country, no matter what your state law says, can perform these RON notarizations. I mean, that's a whole can of worms though, right? Every state has guidelines. different states have who can be considered a RON, can any notary, be a RON in this time of emergency or state of emergency, so on and so forth. So there was a lot behind it. It was expected to go through quickly, but if you'll notice, the first thing I have there, it says still awaiting vote. It's still awaiting vote because it fell in right behind when Congress started working on the COVID-19 stimulus package. I'm sure you can all remember how long that dragged out. And what happened is it pushed back the vote of a lot of bills that were likely to have gone through within that week. So it got pushed back because of the stimulus package. Congress is not in session right now because they are practicing social distancing, and so there is no vote. So what happened was states said, okay, you're not going to step in. We need to start looking at this on a state-by-state basis, and we need to start passing emergency RON bills within our states. So a lot of states who weren't on board before have now passed remote online notarization legislation. It's very important to understand that many of these are considered state of emergency or emergency legislation. And what that means is they have a start and an end. So just because the state has said, okay, you can do remote online notarizations now, it doesn't mean that past 90 days, they're going to allow it. And we're going to talk a little bit more about that with some of the other stuff that's passing. So it's really important that you first know if your state has passed it in any way, shape, or form, whether it was before in effect, whether they passed it and there is no time limit, or whether or not they're considering it temporary emergency legislation. So the states realized federal government's not going to probably get this passed in time. So state by state, various ones are enacting it. Some are not. Some are using other measures of which we will go over. And, it's important to know that just because your state allows RON doesn't mean your lender does. And I mentioned earlier when I was first talking about RON that there are some obstacles. One of the biggest obstacles that we're hearing about and that I've talked to people about is that their lender is not allowing for RON, which is confusing to a lot of people because Franny and Fetty are putting out guidelines saying, yep, we'll accept it in all these states. They listed out the states, we will accept RON closings, RON notes, so on and so forth. And the lenders are saying no. Now, it is important to talk to your lender, ask questions, figure out if they are allowing it. If they're allowing it, who can we use? Do they have a vendor of preference? The usual. It is important to understand that a lot of times lenders aren't saying, no, we can't do it. They don't have the capability. They don't have an e-vault. They don't have a way to store it. So this was kind of really pushed forward and thrown out fast. And in some cases, they're just not capable of doing it or able to perform it and store it. In some cases, they are. So at the end of the day, if your state allows it for whatever reason and you would like to try and start doing RONs, if you aren't already, make sure you talk to your lender. So what about your state? Kind of just went over some of this. It falls to you really. Research the rules and regulations required for your state. People ask us all the time, well, where do I find this? How do I know what's going on? And the answer is your state attorney general's office, your secretary of state, your attorney general. Those are great places to start. You're going to get the most current and up-to-date and reliable resources there. You can sign on to those. You can sign up for newsletters. You can sign up for alerts via email, but that is definitely the first place you're going to want to look. Then look to your trade associations and various other associations that you may be members of, or maybe you're not even required to be a member to access the resources. I put 2 on here, and then I'm actually gonna give David a heads up. I'm gonna ask him if he knows of any other ones once I go through these that he might want to chime in on. But essentially, the National Notary Association is compiling a list of all the different closures, all the different RONs, all the different e-recordings, you name it. They are keeping on top of that, and that is a resource that you can access. Probably one of the best ones that I've seen to date is the American Land Title Association, ALTA, which, as we all know, is our industry's national trade association. Their COVID-19 resource page on their website is outstanding. It has everything. It has laws that have been passed. It has emergency legislation. It has stuff, information on how to conduct closings safely. It has lists of every day of closures. It has lists of, how to record electronically, what states are allowing RON, what's the requirements. So if you haven't checked out their COVID-19 resource page, if you just go to Alta's website, which happens to be alta.org, right there on their home screen is a COVID-19 link. And if you go to there, it is endless information that I urge you to look at. And then the last thing that I would suggest here before I throw this over to David for a real quick question is it's fluid. This is changing every day, right? So I could tell you right now, a certain number say, 32 states are allowing RON, and I could, at the end of the day, maybe have to email you on say, actually 34, because things are getting passed. People are trying to figure out how to make things work, and it's a very fluid situation. So you have to do your due diligence and research the rules and regulations, but you also have to check back constantly to make sure things haven't changed since the last time that you've looked. So David, I just real quickly, and you may or may not have any input on this, but just wondering, other than the NNA and the American Land Title Association, can you think of any other resources or sites that would be helpful in the RON information or obtaining different RON information?
Yeah, the Mortgage Bankers Association has some good articles published, on their sites, et cetera, about, from the lending side, which also gives, our customers some glimpse as to what services are providing for the lender side, which is also a good resource. National Notary Association, which is nationalnotary.org, is the site. Is what you've mentioned is what has a great bit of information, as well as Alta. But the MBA site's also got some good resources on it.
Okay, great. So that's good information. I actually have not even seen the MBA site on this, so I will check that out today, and I urge you guys all to do so as well. Okay, just a little high-level overview. I just went through, and kind of sounds a little counterintuitive, but while each state is going to have specific laws and regulations that need to be followed, there is some key requirements of RON, and they're pretty much the same across the board. And then, of course, states add in their different nuances. But just a real quick high-level overview of some key requirements of a remote online notarization. They must be conducted in real time with continuous audio and visual feeds, meaning you can't do part of it, shut off the video, go make your lunch, and then come back. The notary and the signer have to have a continuous audio visual feed. Must be recorded. The signer and identity is proven using approved ID software tools, incorrectly answering background questions with a specified period of time. I had someone ask me the other day why there was a specified period of time, and that's essentially in hopes of trying to prevent some fraud. If somebody asked me 5 questions about, where I lived, what school I went to, what's my maiden name, stuff like that, I should be able to fire back those answers. If I'm not who I say I am, I might need to look through my notes or, try and dig up that information, and I'm trying to commit fraud. So that's the reason behind that. They are the same type of questions if you were trying to look at your credit report, or if you were trying to log on to a banking type thing where you have put the questions that only you should really know the answers to back quickly. Keep in mind, your state might have additional requirements around identifying the signer, but this will be pretty generic. So the document signed, notarized, and the electronic original is tamper evident. That is pretty much the requirement of RON. And the notary block states that it was notarized remotely. There is a log entry detailing the notarization. This is going to be across the board. And then the notary retains the log and video recording as required by a specific state, and they're also likely to provide this recording to the title or settlement company or closing agent as well. But the states generally determine the length. Some states it's 5 years, some states it's 7 years. It really varies, but you're going to find a version of this process throughout the country. Again, each state might have some additional or less nuances to it, but overall, this is kind of going to be some of the base requirements that are necessary. So we get a lot of questions about RON providers, and when David does his piece, we're going to show you one particular one, or at least walk you through the process a little bit of one that we happen to be integrated with currently, and then he can talk to if you feel comfortable, David, some other different platforms if you'd like, or just some different ways they can research it. But some of the advice we would give you is just like any type of software or platform that you're looking at using, you have to ask the right questions, right? You have to make sure that, okay, this one is going to work for me. It's going to work for organization. Everybody works a little differently, and there's a fit for everybody. So one of the ones that you really need to look at is, are they authorized by regulatory bodies in your area to even perform notarizations, right? Can they even work in your area? Not everybody is approved or met the requirements for every state and every area. So make sure, one, that company A can even do what they need to do in your area. Is onboarding of a firm's notaries allowed, or do they provide the notary used via their service? We get asked this question a lot, and essentially it means, if I have a notary in my office, can my notary perform the remote online notarization, or do we have to use company A's platforms notaries? And that's a kind of a tricky question, and I think that's a very fluid situation from what I've seen, in that the temporary emergency legislation is a lot more relaxed in its requirements than the states that already have RON in place, or the ones that are looking to keep it permanent. David could, if you disagree with that, you can certainly chime in, but essentially that's something you really need to know. And one of the reasons why it's important, other than obviously just knowing who's going to notarize and when, is if you have to use their notary, you have to make sure that the schedule works for them. You also have to make sure that they have the bandwidth to take on more business. You guys really think about it, these RON providers are getting inundated with requests, right? Especially for states and areas that previously weren't allowing RON. Now they're getting asked, okay, we need to come on board. We need you to do our RON closings. We need to get these closed. So if they're only allowing their notaries to do it, then you really need to figure out and talk to them about how it's scheduled, what the availability is like, and what's the turnaround time from when you put in a order in to when it can actually get closed. Are there any setup or implementation costs for using the vendor's service? You should ask that whenever you're talking to any provider, not just a RON provider. What's it going to cost to get you up and running, essentially, is what it is. And then what are any transactional costs associated with the service? Meaning, am I paying you a one-time fee? Am I paying you a one-time fee plus a transactional fee? How does it work? What's your pricing module? Do they have different models that you could choose from? Because again, you got to find what fits your firm the best. Not sure if you can see this. Again, that's a joke. Verified provider is approved by your underwriter. I cannot stress this to you enough. If you find, say, company A, B, and C, and you really like company A and B, you have to go and check with your underwriter to make sure that they have approved company A or B on their list of approved RON providers. Otherwise, they may not insure that policy. So every underwriter has a list. If you don't already know it, reach out to your underwriter or agency rep. You can go to your underwriter's webpage, whomever, but just make sure that when you do choose a RON provider, that you are verifying that that provider is also approved by your underwriter before you start using them. Okay, so we have a couple resources that we've put together with our fantastic sales and marketing team. They have done 2 ebooks so far in a very quick time frame, and they are great. Our marketing department has put out both 1 and 2, the basics of RON and how to use RON. Essentially, book 1 will go over what is RON, various state updates on RON legislation, digital technology terms and definition, different types of closing, kind of what we went over, how RON can benefit your business, and identifying signers. So kind of like your basics, right? And once you're done going through that part 1, go on to part 2, and it's kind of a more detailed dive, if you will. It's more where to access information on your state's requirements, key requirements for RON, vendors currently offering RON, what questions to ask RON providers before choosing their service. And we kind of came up with like a checklist, not only what you need to ask your vendors, but then a checklist on what your team needs to do internally to prepare for RON. So I included the links right here, which you can simply go to our website and find it there as well. If you don't follow our blog that our marketing department has, I strongly urge you to do so. We put stuff out like this all the time, free for our customers. and it's a fantastic resource. So if you have any questions about it, please just reach out to me and I'll get you wherever you need to go. But these are 2 resources that we have already up there for you guys. So I strongly urge using them. Okay, so I'm going to turn it over to David here. He's going to walk you through SoftPro 360 and Black Knight Expedite integration. He can kind of give a little background, if you will, David, on Black Knight Expedite, what they do, and kind of walk them through, and then I'll just keep moving the slides along for you.
Absolutely. So I appreciate everyone taking the time this morning. So we have an integration with Black Knight's Expedite Close, which is a e-sign, e-delivery, e-delivery with consent, e-closing. It also has a RON portion that uses Doc Verify as their backend provider for that service. From an integration standpoint, and I can't stress this enough, we are working, with a variety of other vendors to get them to market as quickly as possible. Granted, we, agreements and all of that. But when people reach out to me and ask about integrated services versus not, what we're going to walk through is what the integration looks like, and this will be very typical of any subsequent integrations that we do with some other providers. But ultimately, the value of the product itself should outweigh whether it's integrated or not. So if we may not have an integration with another provider that we may be working towards, when you're looking at these providers, what Leslie sort of went through before, as to those questions to ask, the providers, the integration does save you time, but ultimately the end experience, the customer experience, the costs associated with that, whether your notaries can facilitate those services, all of those should sort of supersede, whether we have an integration yet, and that we will be working towards, expanding our offerings. But just so you get an idea of what an integrated service looks like, we're going to walk through the Expedite Close, product screens on this demonstration. So this first screen we're seeing here is the delivery details, which we're, naming the package, selecting an operation or branch from a, visibility standpoint, and then the delivery methods here, which is, e-delivery with signature, which is an e-sign experience, e-delivery with consent, which is, acknowledged receipt of delivery. E-delivery only is just sending secure documents, and then e-delivery with closing. E-delivery with closing is a vaulted transaction in compliance with Freddie and Fannie's requirements on the note in particular. But the e-delivery with signature and the e-delivery with closing, if you've configured with Black Knight to do the RON piece, those would be the workflows that would allow for those documents that will fetch to, to be notarized. So we can click to the next slide. So after we've, selected the delivery method, we're going to move to the document selection. And what an integration, with a lot of our 360 integrations allows for the, the rekeying of documents, not pulling them directly out of the system. So we can go directly to the order attachments, pull from any file or folder, we can rename or delete it, and also order it with the arrows on the right-hand side to put it in the appropriate order as necessary. The next screen that we will walk through is going to be, the attachments. And we've done this differently than some of our other 360 integrations because we understand that you'll be selecting multiple documents. So we allow, if you, on this screenshot, I just had one folder, but you could select the folder and select all the docs in there. So you can arrange those ahead of time in your attachment section or select multiples in one session of selecting the documents. We'll move to the next one. And then we're picking the signers or the recipients. Now, and as Leslie sort of mentioned, there's certain authentication that's required, especially with RON. There's, knowledge-based authentication and stuff like that, that Doc Verify takes care of, for this integration in particular. But what most will have is multi-factor authentication. So the minimum requirements for, a signer, like whether that's a buyer, seller, lender, settlement agent, is to have a name in the contact, an email address, as well as a phone. This particular integration can, prefers, mobile phone numbers because they'll text the PIN to the signer to then authenticate, but it can also support home phone numbers where it would call, and give an audio PIN over or a landline. So we're picking the signers here, and then, we don't have to rekey that information from the file into a web portal. We can just pull that directly from the system. We can also add messages on the package level, on the signer level, as well as on the document level. So we'll go next. Now we're just picking, who's signing which documents. By default, it's going to default all signers to sign all docs, but we do allow you to uncheck boxes that are applicable for typical, parties. We also color code, which is consistent across a lot of 360 integrations: blue for buyer, green for seller, and orange for, sort of neutral parties. You can, select which documents that need to be, signed by which parties. And then we'll go to the next screen. And then we always try to give you a review screen, prior to submission. And if those of you are familiar with any of our e-recording products, integrations, there's some, a lot of vendors have built out tools to digitize documents. What I mean by that is apply fields, apply templates. There's certain vendors that we're working with that, in the future may support white ink tagging and some other things, to put the appropriate fields on the documents. So what we're doing on this screen is reviewing it. We can also adjust the signing order as necessary and jump back to any, screen that we want to review those things as needed. But when we hit this submit button, what we're actually going to do is to go directly out to the vendor's website in an authenticated session, where then those documents can be, templates can be applied, or, you can manually tag up the documents, and that's really controlled by the vendor, but that's very similar in all platforms. They have to be able to take the documents and, marry those up, with the corresponding fields, whether you're doing that manually or, applying templates, etc. And then you are going to be able to submit those, from the website out, similar like we do with e-recording, where we bring up their review screens in their browser, and then you can actually submit them to the county to record. The same experience is going to be, here in, a lot of these RON and e-sign and e-closing platforms. And then when those documents are finally executed and they'll return them to us, similar to, a variety of our integrations, we will present you with a review screen. Should you be on SoftPro Select, we've actually automated the return, meaning workflow automation can, consume those documents and attach them to the root folder of the attachments as when they come in, or you simply go into your queue and double click on it. We give you the ability to view the signed docs by clicking the view icon, as well as copy them to your clipboard as you may want to email them or what have you. But by hitting accept, it will attach the documents to the order. So just to recap, the benefit from an integrated service is I don't have to rekey the signer or recipient's information. I can pull the documents directly out of the system, and they can also be remitted right back into the system when they're completed. That is, clearly a value add, and we anticipate adding additional, integrations, and we hope to have some more information for you, in the future with regard to that. But I just want to stress that, if you're looking at, Pavaso, Notarize, or any of these other providers that we haven't integrated with yet, that, the benefit is clear that from an integration standpoint, but it's not overwhelming, where, you can't use that service without having an integration. We will get to a wide swath of these, but, what should drive your decisions is exactly what Leslie sort of went through before, and what we've posted in both of those RON Part 1 and RON Part 2 ebooks that are available on our website, is that those decisions should drive, what service, whether your underwriter, supports it, whether, the lender supports it, and whether it's applicable in your jurisdiction, and what those costs are, and what that customer experience, may be. But we expect to have more integrations, come out shortly. Leslie, I'll sort of pass it back to you, unless there's anything you want to address that we may have missed.
No, I think we're good for now. I do have some questions that I think actually this might be a good time for two of them that I saw earlier. One of them says, is there a training certificate that is needed regarding RON? Can you talk to that a little bit?
Yeah, so certain jurisdictions will have training requirements, and that's going to be, you're going to want to check with the Secretary of State. And then also the providers themselves should be knowledgeable about what those requirements are, but always defer to your, local, jurisdictional authorities as to, what is required but that's a very good question. And certain ones, certain companies will provide those trainings. Certain, licensing bodies may provide those trainings. It's something that, was going to be very different from locality to locality or,
Okay.
jurisdiction.
Yeah, I agreed. Another question was, will all vendors allow the same e-stamps and digital certificate to be used on their platforms, or are there separate ones necessary for each vendor?
That is a very good question. And it is, I think I don't have enough knowledge to answer for every platform. I know that, certain platforms, are transferable, but that would be a very good question to ask. If I've, signed up with DocVerify, is that transferable? I know in states in Virginia where, they, do all that stuff, is that transferable to another platform? That would be contingent on the technology for that other platform, whether they can consume that, but that's something that you would definitely want to ask, a subsequent provider if you are already certified with one, what can be transferred, if anything, over to that other system.
Okay, and we had a couple questions specifically come in from the integration, so I'm going to throw these out to you as well.
Yeah.
One of them says, does the wizard tag, if you will, the documents where the parties need to sign?
Yeah, in the Black Knight Expedite product, the documents are tag lists. They're not digitized when we're pulling them from the wizard. What happens on the web UI, which we didn't really show you in this demonstration, is you can apply templates based on certain criteria in the document that are read, similar to like DocuSign has that same experience where you can apply a template and then adjust the tags should you need to. You can also manually tag them up prior to submission, to be signed. So there's two things with the Black Knight product is that they support templating. So documents that you send out routinely, you would want to work with them to template those documents. And then second, you can also manually tag up those documents. But that's a very good question.
Okay, and then someone else asked, is there an ability to have questions answered during the signing? For example, an affidavit?
Yes, you can fill in, like if they want to like check off boxes or fill in fields or, not just, applying a signature or a notary block, there's a wide range of things the documents themselves can do. You can also write messages, please read carefully on a document by document level, but it is something that, you can code the document to consume information and force the user to type, answers or check off boxes, affirmatively, such as, an owner's affidavit. But that would be done on the template or the tagging of the documents.
Okay, and just so that people know, we had a couple questions on people that are trying to get signed up for Expedite and maybe not have the right process in place. So we will send something out to all attendees after this on how to get signed up with the Expedite and SoftPro 360, and have a number on there if you're having any issues that you can call us and we can help you out. So for those of you that have sent that in, we will certainly send that out. Someone else also asked us about any other RON providers we're trying to integrate with and ETAs. And, like David said, we're working with various different ones, and we don't generally have a time frame as far as that we can share for most of them just because of NDAs until they're ready to go. But I don't know if you can speak to that, David, and just know that we're working with other vendors and trying to get them on board.
Yeah, we are working with several of the major providers. We expect, to be wrapping up some agreements, but we are under NDA with all of them. So unfortunately, until, we're ready to publicly announce integrations with these providers, we can't, really speak to that at this point, but we are working, very, diligently with these providers to get these services, from an integration standpoint to market as quickly as possible.
Okay, and I think we'll do one more, and then just again, for anyone that might have sent in some questions, we will absolutely answer them. We may send you an email answering them. We just don't have time to get to every single one of them via this webinar, but this one is interesting. It's, is it necessary to sign up with Black Knight / Expedite and DocVerify, or is that done via the integration?
Yeah, so it is, they will sign up with, the, Black Knight, Expedite Close to do, the e-sign, e-closing portions, whatever products you wish to support. There is a separate configuration with DocVerify that Black Knight facilitates. So they will direct you to sign up for Doc Verify, the RON piece of this product. And from an integration standpoint, the docs are pulled out, the signer information's pulled out, the docs are sent back in. What happens, when those docs are either signed or notarized, there's two sort of workflows, whether it's just going to be Black Knight, they're going to be in that portal, or they're going to be directed to a Doc Verify branded Black Knight portal that allows for videos and, face-to-face that's required for remote online notarization. So there is some setup if you wish to configure for the RON piece of this integration in their product. There is some additional setup and costs via Doc Verify that Black Knight would walk you through it and push you to, do those appropriate things.
Okay, great information, David. Thanks for answering the questions. We have some follow-up questions that David, you and I can get together later and send them, but I think we will, for time purposes, move on. So the next thing we're going to talk about is RIN. Like I said earlier, don't confuse it with RON. We know how much our industry loves acronyms. RIN is a remote ink signing notarization. And what is that? It is essentially the answer for the states that don't want to implement RON or don't want to let RON occur without all of the rules and regulations behind it, or really just recognize it takes a lot for some people to get up and running for a remote online notary. So we're going to allow remote ink sign notarizations. Probably the biggest one that came through with this was New York. They were pretty early adopter. Essentially what it is RIN eliminates the need for in-person signings, allowing a notary and a signer to be in different physical locations, very similar to RON. However, it doesn't require that third-party remote online notarization platform. It essentially allows you to use any webcam technology, any audiovisual, so that notary can watch the person physically sign a document. We're not talking about an electronic signature, so obviously another difference. So I'm going to watch David, I'm going to log in, we're both going to see each other, I'm going to do what I need to do, I'm going to watch him sign it, and then he's going to return those documents to me to notarize. So we're going to kind of walk through this because it's a little bit newer for a lot of people, but it is an easier approach than a full-blown RON, which I think at the end of this will be what our industry obviously is striving for and gets on board with. But in the meantime, if you are trying to do closings and your state allows it, this prevents people from having to come to your office. So how is it different? I kind of just went over that. With a RIN, you can use any video solution, such as GoToMeeting, Microsoft Teams, Google, WebEx, Zoom, you name it, anything where you can physically see the other party. The notary still has to verify the identity based on existing state notary laws, or in this case, it's temporary emergency legislation that was passed, and they may have outlined it in there saying, okay, we're going to allow you to perform a RIN, and here's how you have to do it. So every state, again, is different, so you need to do your due diligence. Paper documents are signed in pen and then sent back to the notary, who then physically applies their notary stamp. So there's no e-signing here. You're just visually not in the same location. Whereas RON, of course, we went through this, whole lot of extra stuff is needed. You need to be able to verify electronically, you need to be able to sign electronically, there's no paper signature, and they notarize it electronically. So that's the two biggest difference. I think they're just trying to test how, if we're losing our minds in quarantine or not, if we can remember when we're talking what's a RIN, what's a RON. So hopefully I don't mess it up. I'm used to it now, but RIN is a new one. So what is the typical RIN workflow, just to kind of understand it better, is somehow or another you've gotten that paper closing package delivered to the borrower. Whether you've UPS'd it, FedEx, delivered it, dropped it off at the door, they picked it up at the office, whatever it is, they physically have it in their possession. Notary and signer appear before each other using a live real-time video. Again, it's not an actual platform as far as software that we were talking about for RON. It's just a webcam service, if you will. Notary identifies the signer using the guidelines of the current law. We just talked about that. The notary uses audiovisual technology to witness the borrower signing the document. They have to physically see me sign it. So if David is a notary, he's actually watching me physically sign this document. Borrower returns signed documents to notary in any way, fashion that they want to, as long as it gets to them. And then the notary physically applies his or her stamp to the document. So there's no electronic notary, no electronic signature. Notary retains recording for a minimum period by state laws. And if no period is specified, then the recording is required to be retained by 7 years. And that comes from Fannie and Freddie. Most states are going to have a specific timeline. The lender should maintain a recording for the portions of the signing that were notarized for the life of the loan. Makes perfect sense. Again, that falls to them to store that electronically. Okay, so what state's allowing it? A good amount have passed it, and I expect to see more. So if your state is up here, that means that remote ink sign notarization is allowable in your state to date. It is important to know that currently these are all temporary orders, and what that means is there's a start and an end date. So it's going to fall to you to make sure, hey, I do business in New York. I need to know when this ends because I need to make sure that I'm complying. Some of these may be extended depending on how long this goes on. I don't know, but they are temporary orders. I know California is not on this list, but has just passed it, which again, this proves my point earlier, is this is a very fluid situation. I literally just put this presentation together. So there are different states, different things that we need to go ahead and watch and keep ahead with and see what we can do as far as knowing the dates of when to start and end this. All right, so preparing for RUN in your state, what can you do? Well, you can confirm that your state authorizes the use of RUN first and foremost. Every state has required regulations, so make sure you follow your state ones. No different than RUN, right? Make sure you follow what your state says. Know the time frame in which you're authorized to perform them. We just talked about it, but just keep in mind these are temporary. Confirm that the lender has provided approval to perform a loan signing using RUN. This is as important that you check with your underwriter on the RUN providers, right? You have to make sure your lender says, this is okay, we're gonna accept this and we're allowing a RUN closing. And then just research the various video platforms. Everyone has access to these, but whichever one works best or what you're set up for, just make sure it's set up, do a couple run throughs and make sure it all works properly before conducting a RUN closing. Okay, so we have e-recording. This is not so new, it's just a lot more popular right now, right? So going through e-recording real quick, we have, essentially what it is it's an electronic document recording process where essentially you submit everything electronically rather than taking them physically to the courthouse. They are reviewed, recorded, and returned back electronically as well. It automates your doc examination, fee collection, image retention, data processing, so on and so forth. And it allows counties to reduce the manual process and effort from essentially days and weeks to minutes. That's in a regular world, right? So a couple things going on with what we're going through now. One is that the shelter in place is causing more and more counties to allow e-recordings that didn't really allow them before. So you really need to check your local guidelines and requirements. I mentioned Alta before. Alta has a recorder's office closing resource section in their COVID-19 resources, and it is a daily update of when you can record, how you can record, can you record electronically, do you have to record in person, of all the different municipalities in the country. So you can check within your own state, or you can also check various sites. Any e-recording software, I think you've got, you know, EPN, Simplifile, CRC, all of those, they also have a lot of resources. So if you're already using one or you're looking at one to use, then go ahead and check their websites. They have a lot of information for you to look at. Your county may not have accepted e-recordings prior to this, and they may be accepting them now, and you don't realize that. There's a lot of questions of how this works in today's world, simply because, you know, if I accept them, but I'm closed, how does that work? So there's a lot that goes into it. You really have to make sure and see what your county is accepting. A lot of them are allowing you to e-record it even if they're not there and they are kind of remotely working through it, so on and so forth. So just double check on what's acceptable in your area. We have several partners already integrated through SoftPro 360 prior to this. We have CSC, we have EPN, Simplifile, and then I believe Sonogo is coming soon. So we have those on board already. If you're using someone that's not on here, it doesn't mean you can't use them. Just make sure that you're meeting your area's requirements. And kind of to David's point earlier of when he was talking about the ease of the integration and automation, when you're doing the recordings with the companies that are integrated with SoftPro 360, it does cut back on rekeying of information, time of attaching files and documents and so forth. So keep that in mind if you aren't currently e-recording and are going to, perhaps look at some of the ones that are already partnered up with us to make it a little easier for you. I mentioned this already, track local recording offices and foreclosures and e-recording. Again, American Land Title, and then your e-recording provider websites are your best resources for that. There's so many municipalities that it's really important that you stay on top of it wherever you do business. I mean, it's borderline something you should be checking daily. And they change them sometimes. Some of them are starting to open up 1 or 2 days a week. It's just real important to kind of stay on top of the situation and figure out where you can record and when. Oh my goodness. My favorite part is here in perfect timing. We are going to have time to look through a couple more questions. And while we do that, I'm going to go ahead and put up my favorite screen. No offense, David, I loved your presentation. But my favorite screen is my recipes and refreshments. So I mentioned earlier, we're trying to kind of just, stay in touch with you guys about things, to kind of mental check-in, give you a break from sitting there by yourself, right? And kind of also go over some topics that we think will be helpful. So one of the things we thought would be fun here at SoftPro was to share some recipes and some drink recipes. So I went ahead and started with what I consider 2 pretty easy ones. I will say I absolutely love to cook. I cook almost every single day. I love fresh herbs. I love fresh food. I love cooking for hours on end, but I promise you the recipes that I'm going to put in here are going to be easier, and also a lot of ingredients that you should have on hand. Also keep in mind, based on what I'm giving you, it doesn't mean you have to use it. A couple of things in here, if you don't have fresh parsley, no worries, don't put it on there. So you can adapt to it. You can make them pantry recipes, if you will, but just to kind of go over these real quick, we have a pasta with garlic sauce. It's pretty much addicting, and it takes about 15 minutes to make. It takes as long to make as your pasta takes to cook. Let's put it that way. So I like to use a thick spaghetti in this. I know a friend that makes it likes it with linguine. I do suggest a thicker pasta, not an angel hair, just simply because of the type of sauce. You'll notice down here it says make the garlic sauce. It's so easy. You make it while the pasta is boiling and put it to the side, and then just combine them later. It is absolutely delicious. I know you're all looking at this right now and you're seeing 10 to 12 cloves of garlic. What in the heck? I promise you, I put more. I put more only because my family absolutely loves garlic and we love flavor. So if you want to throw some more in there, go ahead. And like I said, if you don't have a few of the things, no big deal. Real quick, this go-to seasoning is amazing. You can make this and save it. You can see you only need a couple teaspoons for this recipe, but you can put it on any type of pasta, any type of protein. It's really good. So if you make it, just kind of save it and seal it, and you can use it as your own spice rub, if you will. More importantly, for a lot of people stuck in quarantine right now, like myself, we have a drink recipe down here at the bottom. This is a cranberry basil sangria. It can be made with or without wine, okay? It's quarantine. I'm pretty sure most of you are going to want to make this with wine, but you do not have to make it with wine. I've made it for my kids without, and then added the wine for myself and my husband. It's real easy. Again, you can switch out fruit. I do it all the time. Whatever I have is what I make. So you can use these kind of as a base. If anyone has a great recipe, oh my goodness, feel free to email them to me. I absolutely love recipes, and maybe we'll feature it. I'd love to feature some SoftPro customers' recipes on here. If anyone has any drink recipes, I obviously love getting those. I'm going to go ahead. Somebody just said, wow, cranberry basil sounds wonderful. Yes, it is wonderful. And in most of you maybe are hopefully living in areas where it's starting to warm up and you can at least sit outside and enjoy the weather. I'm here in Chicago, where yesterday was 65 and today is 39. So we don't really know what we're getting on a day-to-day basis. So we like to drink inside and outside here. Let's see, I'm trying to think if there's anything else. Somebody just said, can you please send this presentation to the attendees, mostly for the recipes, but yeah, for the info. I love that. So we are absolutely going to send this out. This is our first one, so we apologize for any technical difficulties. a couple throughout saying sound was in and out. Unfortunately, there's not much we can do about that. We have to do it all remotely and use our computers. But we do plan on making recordings of all of these and making them available to you all. So for the first one, since we just kind of wanted to get up and running, we will email it out to you all to the attendee list so everyone has a copy. And that way you have the recipes, you have all the information. But again, please, please, please feel free to reach out. I know we'll send another email out later this week with next week's topic, but we plan to hold these every Tuesday, 11:30 Eastern, 10:30 Central. So if there's anything you want to talk about, just let me know. And I appreciate it. And thank you so much, David. I'm sure we'll be bringing you back to talk about something else at some point. And with that, I think we'll end it and hope everyone has a great week and stay healthy.
Thank you very much.